Mám krásný obrazy. Tak. As we've been hearing this morning, corruption is a complex social, political and economic phenomenon. Achieving transparency and integrity in public life is an ever-present responsibility for governments and for all others in positions of public trust, whether they're in the Czech Republic, the UK, the US or anywhere else. Whether we have old or new political systems, old or new legal systems, we have an ongoing responsibility to ensure that our anti-corruption measures are fit for purpose, they are properly implemented and that they are enforced. As we've heard from so many people already this morning, bribery is not only a moral concern, nor is corruption only a threat to fair competition. Bribery and corruption threaten good governance, and they waste scarce public resources. They undermine sustainable economic development. So there are plenty of good domestic arguments for tackling corruption effectively. But in today's interconnected and globalised world, corruption is not confined within national boundaries. And nor, importantly, is action to tackle and prevent it. When a company decides to expand its activity beyond the borders of its own country, that activity brings many rewards, but it can bring challenges and perhaps temptations in jurisdictions that are regulated differently and perhaps not so well as their home countries. So to set common international standards, we've already heard that the international community has agreed instruments such as the UN Convention Against Corruption, the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, and like my American colleague, I hope that changes and reforms to Czech law will enable your country soon to subscribe to more of these international conventions. These international requirements have also paved the way for robust domestic legislation. So that's to say that companies cannot operate by one set of rules at home and leave those standards behind when they go abroad. My own country, the UK, is ranked 20th in the Transparency International Perceptions of Corruption Index. But like the US, we're not complacent. In 2 weeks' time, on the 1st of July, the British government's new Bribery Act will come into force. This is a major modernisation of an older patchwork of bribery laws that date back to the late 19th and early 20th century. Of course, bribery has been a criminal offence in the UK for a long time. UK-registered companies and individuals are already breaking UK law if they commit acts of bribery overseas. And I, too, am also breaking that law if I fail to report my suspicions that they may be doing so. Under the new Act, anyone found guilty may face up to 7 years in jail and or face an unlimited fine. Just think about that. It's worth noting, too, that the law applies as well to whether the recipient is in the public or the private sector. The principles underlying the Act are simple. It outlaws the offering, promising or giving of an advantage or the requesting or receiving of an advantage. Put simply, that means promising, offering or giving financial or other benefit to persuade somebody to act improperly or as a reward for acting improperly. I'd like to draw your attention particularly to two new provisions of our legislation. The first is an offence relating specifically to bribery of a foreign public official, to obtain or retain business or an advantage in the conduct of business. And secondly, and this is a very important point I think for the Czech Republic, a new corporate offence, an offence of a failure by a commercial organisation to prevent a bribe being paid for or on its behalf. In other words, all companies must have adequate procedures in place to prevent bribery. Some of you are probably wondering whether this slightly dry presentation matters to you. Well, of course it does, because it is important that Czech business is aware of our law, how it might affect you and your company. Compared to our American friends, the UK is normally very cautious about extraterritorial application of laws. But, as I said earlier, corruption recognises no boundaries. So, in this case, we recognise the need for legislation not only to provide high standards of behaviour, but also to prevent criminals from hiding in the gaps between different jurisdictions. So the Bribery Act will apply whether you're a British subject, a British company, resident in the UK, or simply a company that carries on part of its business in the UK, for example, buying or selling goods. And it applies to activities that take place anywhere in the world. So it's worth thinking about. Returning to Prague, the British government very strongly supports Prime Minister Nečas's aims and his new anti-corruption strategy. And there was a lot I heard from Prime Minister Nečas this morning that I hope I'm not repeating too much, duplicating. I found it very, very encouraging and inspiring speech. Given our own recent experience with drawing up new legislation, we feel we've got a lot to share in bridging the gap from good intentions to effective policy and legislation. So, as you've already heard, I've been working with my American and German counterparts, with non-governmental experts, and with Czech ministers and their officials to share the experience of our respective countries in what we've called a month of transparency. The Czech government, like so many others at present, faces difficult challenges of balancing public finances as we recover from recession, challenges of making social provision from an ageing population, challenges of providing education that our children need so that they can build a competitive, innovative Europe. Tackling corruption is no less a challenge, and we will continue to support the Czech government in the face of so many competing pressures to continue with these important changes that promote good governance and good stewardship of public finances, changes that serve the interests of the taxpayers, changes that support the flow of investment into your country. I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to address today's seminar. Talking about these issues is a very good and very positive start, but the real challenge is to turn words into effective action. I wholly agree with your Prime Minister and with my American colleague that this is not just a matter of government for governments. Effective action requires commitment from government, local government, business, and the wider public and society. Those in positions of authority need to set effective rules. They need to implement them. They need to lead by example. But that alone is not enough. Business and wider society must also make clear that they want to operate and live in a culture where corruption is not tolerated. I'd just like to give one example from my own country of this. You may recall that a British newspaper, not so long ago, the Daily Telegraph, published details of expense claims by our members of Parliament. On the whole, most of these people were not actually corrupt. Many of them were not actually dishonest. Nevertheless, many of them were criticised for the way they had used the expenses system and claimed money from the public purse. Even when they were not strictly breaking the rules, many were criticised. Some of them apologised for their poor judgment and repaid the money. Some, who were seen to have misused their position, lost their parliamentary seats. Those who had broken the law by submitting fraudulent or dishonest claims faced prosecution and prison, and several of our former members of Parliament are now in prison as a result of those expenses claims. I use this as a quick example to show that neither the British government, nor the British courts, nor the British public will tolerate abuse of office or corruption. And I think that's perhaps my key message this morning, that it is that culture of non-tolerance that is perhaps the most important thing we can do in preventing corruption. To conclude, I've heard very many times since I came to the Czech Republic the old saying that under communism, if you did not steal from the state, you were stealing from your family. Now, other people that you will hear later will be better able than me, and some you've already heard this morning, to calculate the cost to the public finances of not preventing corruption. But let me leave you with the thought that stealing from the state is stealing from your family. We all share a responsibility to build culture where corruption is not acceptable, a transparent and fair political and business environment where businesses and individuals can thrive on an equal footing, and where public money is used for the general good. I'm sure that's what we all want for ourselves, for our children, and for their children. It's good for our businesses, it's good for our economies, and it's essential for the health of our societies. I look forward to continuing to work with my many Czech colleagues to achieve this in both our countries. Thank you. Děkuji vám za pozornost.
Děkuji paní velvyslankyně a teď si dáme takový americko-český mix od každého trochu. Poprosím profesora Jana Švejnara.